The observatory was quiet at 2 in the morning. Most people on Earth were sleeping, but Dr. Jin-Ho was not. He sat alone in the dark control room, surrounded by screens that glowed soft blue in the silence. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, sitting forgotten next to his keyboard. The data on the screens meant nothing to most people, but Jin-Ho had spent 23 years learning to read them. Tonight, something was very wrong. Jin-Ho was the head of the International Space Observatory, a position that sounded more important than it actually was. Most of his days were spent checking satellite readings, analyzing electromagnetic waves from deep space, and writing reports that very few people would ever read. He was good at his work, careful and precise. He did not make mistakes. So when he noticed the encrypted transmission at 2:17 a.m., he knew immediately that something unusual had happened. The signal was not coming from Earth. That was the first strange thing. It was not coming from any known satellite either. The frequency was completely foreign, something Jin-Ho had never seen in his entire career. His hands moved across the keyboard, running the signal through every analysis program he could access. The transmission was strong, too strong, but it was also very far away. Jin-Ho estimated the distance with growing concern. The signal was coming from beyond the moon, somewhere in deep space, millions of kilometers away. He should have reported this to someone. That was what procedure demanded. But something made him stop. The signal had a structure. It was too organized to be natural, too complex to be random. Someone had sent this message and they had tried to hide it. The encryption was military grade, better than anything Jin-Ho had ever seen. Yet somehow his programs were decoding small pieces of it. Words began appearing on his screen, strange words in an unfamiliar language. Then his computer did something impossible. It translated the words into English. Jin-Ho felt his heart stop. He read the words again, thinking his tired mind was playing tricks on him, but they remained the same, clear and terrible on the black screen. Fleet Readiness Report. Target, Earth. Classification, Level 3 Civilization. Status, Scheduled for Acquisition and Absorption. Timeline, 87 solar cycles. Resistance probability, minimal. His hands shook as he scrolled through more of the message. It was a report, a military report. Someone out there in space was sending reports about Earth, treating his entire world like it was nothing more than a piece of property to be bought and sold. The message continued with horrible details: population count, resource evaluation, mineral deposits, water quantity, agricultural potential, every measurement of Earth's worth, calculated and cataloged as though the billions of people living here were simply inventory. And there was more. A fleet designation, something called the Valorian Third Conquest Division, departure dates, weapon specifications. It took Jin-Ho's mind several minutes to process what he was reading. An invasion. Someone, somewhere in the galaxy, had decided to invade Earth. They had already written the schedule. The fleet would arrive within months. Jin-Ho's first instinct was disbelief. This had to be a hoax, a very complicated, very well-executed hoax, but a hoax nonetheless. He ran his verification programs again. The signal was definitely real. The encryption was definitely military grade, and the data contained information that no hacker on Earth could possibly know. Details about Earth's geology, about human genetics, about every resource that existed on the planet. This was not a hoax. This was real. He looked at the clock. 3:41 a.m. Jin-Ho knew he should call someone, but who would believe him? He picked up his phone and put it down again. What could he say? That he had intercepted a message from an alien military force? They would think he was crazy. He would lose his job. The message would be forgotten, labeled as some kind of censor error or mistake. But what if it was not a mistake? What if he did nothing, and in a few months, massive ships appeared in Earth's sky? What if he had the only warning and he chose to stay silent? Jinho made a decision. He began copying every piece of data from the transmission onto isolated drives. He worked carefully, methodically, doing everything exactly right. It took 3 hours to copy everything. By the time he finished, the sun was beginning to rise outside the observatory windows. He put the drives into his bag and sat for a long moment, just staring at the screens. The world outside the observatory was waking up. Cars would begin driving. People would go to work. Children would go to school. None of them knew that they had only months to live. None of them knew that somewhere in the darkness of space, a massive fleet was heading toward them. None of them knew that their existence had been entered into a ledger, their death already scheduled like an appointment. Jinho stood up on shaking legs. His eyes felt dry from staring at screens all night. He was exhausted, but he knew he would not sleep. He put on his jacket and walked to the door. He needed to find someone who would believe him. He needed to find someone important enough to make people listen. He thought of Captain Lee Ra. She was a military officer, someone connected to the government, someone with authority. They had met years ago at a conference about planetary defense. Lee Ra was not friendly, but she was smart. More importantly, she was someone who dealt with security matters. She would understand the importance of what he had discovered. She would know what to do. Jinho left the observatory as the morning light painted the sky orange and pink. The sun rose on a world that did not know it was being hunted. The morning news talked about weather and politics and sports, the everyday concerns of a civilization that still believed it would have a tomorrow. In just a few months, everything would change. In just a few months, Earth would face a choice that would determine whether humanity lived or died. But Jinho was the only one who knew, and he was running out of time to make anyone believe him. Captain Lee Ra did not like unexpected visitors. She was sitting at her desk reviewing security reports when her assistant told her that Dr. Jinho from the International Space Observatory was in the building and insisted on seeing her immediately. Lee Ra's first reaction was irritation. She had important work to do. She did not have time for academics with wild theories about space, but something in her assistant's voice made her reconsider. The girl sounded genuinely worried, and she remembered Jinho from the conference years ago. He was the quiet type, the kind of person who thought carefully before speaking. He was not someone who would create a fuss without good reason. "Send him in," Lee Ra said, putting down her papers. Jinho looked like he had not slept. His clothes were wrinkled, and his eyes had the wild look of someone who had seen something that changed everything. He sat down in the chair across from Lee Ra's desk without waiting to be asked. Normally, Lee Ra would have found this rude. Today, she just listened. Jinho told her everything. He explained the strange signal, the encrypted message, the translation. He placed the data drives on her desk with shaking hands. Lee Ra listened without interrupting. When he finished, there was silence in the room. She stared at the drives like they might explode at any moment. "This is fake," Lee Ra said finally. "Some kind of prank. Someone hacking into the observatory system." "I thought that too," Jinho said. "But look at the data, the information they have about Earth, the details about our resources and our genetics. No hacker on this planet knows these things. Not in this detail. And the technology they use to encrypt it, it's beyond anything we have." Lee Ra was a military officer, trained to think about problems strategically. She had spent her career imagining threats. But this was different. This was not a theoretical threat. This was something concrete, something real. She inserted one of the drives into her computer. The files began to load. Lee Ra read slowly, her expression growing darker with each line. The military specifications, the weapon designations, the exact date the fleet would leave its starting point. All of it was written in a language that should not exist, describing technology that should not be possible. "If this is real," Lee Ra said slowly, Then we have maybe 4 or 5 months before they arrive. 5 months to prepare for an invasion by a superior military force. Less than that, Jinho said quietly. The message is already days old. It took time to reach us, and the transmission speed suggests they sent it from multiple locations. They have ships already moving toward us. Lira stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the city was going about its normal business. People were walking, driving, living their lives as though the world was not about to end. She thought about her family. Her sister was a teacher. Her brother worked in a factory. Her parents were retired and spent their days in the garden they had worked on for 30 years. What would she tell them? How could she explain that in a few months, none of this would exist anymore? We need to go to the United Nations, Lira said. If this is real, this is bigger than any single country. This is a human problem. The entire world needs to know. They will not believe us, Jinho said. They will say it is a hoax. They will say it is impossible. Maybe, Lira agreed. But we have to try. Getting the UN to take them seriously took more work than either of them expected. Lira used her military connections to get a meeting with Earth's Security Council. The council members were skeptical, just as Jinho had predicted. Some laughed. Some called the evidence fake. Some suggested that Jinho was having a mental breakdown, but Lira was patient and persistent. She ran the analysis programs again, showing the council members exactly how the signals had been decoded. She explained the military specifications. She showed them the data about Earth's resources and population. She made them understand that whether they believed it or not, someone out there believed it. Someone out there was building ships. Someone out there was preparing an invasion. Slowly, doubt crept into the council members' faces. Not belief, exactly, but doubt. And doubt was enough to start moving things. The council requested that other scientists review Jinho's findings. They called in military strategists and tech experts. Within 2 days, 12 different nations had their best minds examining the data. The response was chaos. Some scientists confirmed Jinho's work. The technology was real, they said. The encryption was real. The signal was definitely not from Earth. Other scientists argued that it must be a hoax, a complicated alien transmission meant to confuse Earth's governments. Debate raged in universities and military headquarters and government offices around the world. But the debate changed when one scientist discovered something new in the data. Buried deep in the transmission was a recording, a video. It showed creatures that were not human, working in what appeared to be a military command center. They moved with confidence and purpose, clearly accustomed to power and control. They were discussing Earth in calm, practical tones like generals discussing a conquered city. The video was just 90 seconds long, but it changed everything. This was not a hoax. No human conspiracy could have created creatures like that. No special effects were good enough. This was real. Earth was about to be invaded by an alien species called the Valorians, and they had less than 5 months to prepare. The world governments went into emergency sessions. Some nations demanded immediate military mobilization. Others wanted to attempt peaceful negotiation. Some called for total evacuation of cities. Some called for surrender before any war could start. Arguments broke out between countries and within countries. The stock market crashed. Governments fell. Militaries prepared for war against an enemy they could not possibly defeat. But in all the chaos, a young programmer named Min Kyung was thinking differently. While world leaders argued about weapons and strategies, Min Kyung was thinking about something else. She was thinking about communication. She was thinking about what you could do with words when weapons would never be enough. She was thinking about a message that could change everything. She picked up her phone and called Dr. Jinho. She had an idea, she said, an idea that might actually work. Min Kyung's apartment was small and messy, filled with computers and empty coffee cups. She was 28 years old and had spent the last decade working in technology. When Jin Ho arrived at her door, she was already deep in her work, her fingers flying across multiple keyboards at once. She had spent all night thinking about the problem. "They want to conquer us because they think we are weak," Min Kyung said without preamble. "They have sent a message treating us like inventory, but what if we sent a message back? Not a threat, not a surrender, something completely different." Jin-ho sat down at her small table, trying to follow her logic. "What kind of message?" "The truth," Min Kyung said simply. "Human truth. Not military specifications, not weapons, not resources, just us. What we are, what we do, what we survive." She showed him what she had been working on. A compilation. Thousands of videos, photographs, recordings, and documents from all of human history. Moments of war and violence, yes, but also moments of beauty. Paintings and music. Acts of kindness. People helping each other. People standing up against impossible odds. People loving each other despite everything. "We tell them our story," Min Kyung explained. "We show them what humanity really is. Not the resources they can extract, not the population they can control. We show them the human spirit. We show them what makes us human." It was an insane idea. It was also, Jin Ho realized, the only idea that might work. Getting approval for the project was difficult. The military wanted to use their resources to build weapons. Politicians wanted to use the transmission time to negotiate. But Min Kyung and Jin Ho convinced the UN Council that they had nothing to lose. Military resistance would fail. Negotiation with a species that had already scheduled Earth's conquest would fail. But communication? Communication was something humans were good at. Communication could surprise people. The team came together quickly. Hae-won, a brilliant linguist, was brought in to help translate the message into the Valorian language. She had to learn their language from scratch, using just the intercepted transmission. It should have been impossible, but Hae-won was patient and intelligent. She found patterns in the Valorian language and began to understand its structure. Tae-sung, an engineer with a gift for technology, worked on making sure the transmission would reach every Valorian outpost in known space. He designed the code to be difficult to block. He made sure it would bounce off satellites and travel through every communication channel available. Once they sent this message, there would be no stopping it. Every Valorian, from the highest general to the lowest worker, would eventually hear humanity's voice. For 3 weeks, the team worked without stopping. They selected the most powerful pieces of human history. They included wars, yes, but they also included the music written during those wars. They included suffering, but they included the art created to survive that suffering. They included failure and loss, but they included the stories of people who stood up and tried again. They recorded messages from people around the world. A mother speaking about her children. A soldier talking about why he stopped fighting. An artist explaining why beauty matters. A scientist describing the human drive to understand the universe. A child asking if there was anyone out there listening. Every message carried the same theme. Humanity was not afraid of dying. Humanity was afraid of living without meaning. Humanity was not afraid of being conquered. Humanity was afraid of having its spirit broken. Captain Lee Ra personally oversaw the security of the project. She knew that if this message was sent, it was a complete commitment. There was no taking it back. Once it went out into space, the Valorians would know that Earth was not going to surrender. There would be no going back to the option of peaceful negotiation. The message was a declaration, a refusal, a statement that humans would rather be destroyed than be enslaved. Lee Ra read the message from beginning to end, watching the videos, listening to the voices. By the time she finished, she had made her decision. She signed the approval papers. The message would be sent. The transmission began at midnight. The combined power of every broadcasting station on Earth was focused on the sky. the signal shot upward, carrying with it the voice of a planet that refused to die quietly. The message did not go to one place. It went to hundreds of places, to every Valorian military station, to every trade route, to every communication channel the Valorians used. The message was simple in its structure, but infinite in its complexity. It was all of human history compressed into a transmission that would take days to fully receive. It was war and peace. It was violence and love. It was failure and triumph. It was everything that made humans human. In the command centers of the Valorian Empire, the message was received with confusion. Military protocols tried to block it, but it was already spreading too fast. By the time they shut down one channel, the message was already appearing on another. The Valorians could not stop it. They could only listen. Commander Q Huan received the message on his fleet ship, stationed in a remote outpost of Valorian space. He had been part of the conquest machine for his entire career. He had participated in the assimilation of 6 other species. He had never questioned it. It was simply what Valorians did. It was the purpose of his existence. But as he listened to human music, watched human art, heard human stories, something changed inside him. For the first time in his life, Q Huan wondered if the Valorian way was right. He wondered if the millions of species they had conquered had felt the same things that humans were expressing in this message. He wondered if he had been part of something horrible. The Valorian leadership tried to suppress the message. They tried to convince their people that it was propaganda, that it was fake, that it meant nothing. But the message was already spreading, and it was having an effect that no one had predicted. The species that served the Valorian Empire, the races that had been conquered and broken by centuries of subjugation, were beginning to listen. They were beginning to wonder. In the darkness of space, a spark had been lit, and that spark was about to burn down an empire. The response from the Valorian Empire came faster than anyone expected. It was not a response in words. It was a response in action. The invasion fleet, which had been scheduled to arrive in 5 months, suddenly accelerated. Their ships jumped to a faster speed. The conquest protocol was no longer being followed. This was no longer a planned acquisition. This was a destruction mission. Earth's governments received the news in an emergency session. The Valorian fleet had changed course. They were coming to destroy Earth, not conquer it. They were going to exterminate humanity and everything humanity had ever created. The message had worked too well. It had convinced the Valorian leadership that humans were too dangerous to live. Panic spread across Earth like a disease. People ran to governments demanding protection. Some demanded weapons. Some demanded escape. Some demanded surrender. Cities filled with people trying to get to military bunkers or high-altitude locations. The world economy collapsed in hours. International cooperation broke down. Governments began hoarding resources and weapons. Captain Lyra watched the chaos and realized that this was only the beginning. They had weeks, maybe less, before the Valorian ships arrived. The Earth military was preparing for war, but they all knew the truth. Human weapons were not advanced enough. Human fighters could not win against Valorian technology. They would fight, yes, but they would lose. That was when Q Huan made contact. The Valorian commander sent a secret message to Earth. He had been hiding his response to humanity's transmission carefully. When the Valorian leadership ordered the destruction of Earth, Q Huan made a choice that would cost him everything. He decided to help the humans. Q Huan explained in his message that the human transmission had created unprecedented unrest in the Valorian Empire. Worlds that had been conquered were beginning to rebel. The lower castes of Valorian society were demanding equality. The rigid structure that had held the empire together for centuries was beginning to crack. The leadership had responded with brutality, but they could not control it all. They could not be everywhere at once. More importantly, Q Huan had access to something valuable. He had control of a fleet, a small fleet compared to the Empire's total military, but significant nonetheless. He had spoken to trusted officers in his command. Some of them believed in the human message too. Some of them were ready to stop following orders that did not make sense anymore. "I will not help you win." Q Huan's message was careful and clear. "I cannot. The Empire is too powerful, but I can help you survive. I can give you weapons. I can give you tactical information. I can send ships to help defend your world, but you must understand that I cannot do this openly. I must hide my actions. I must be very careful, or my entire fleet will be destroyed by the Valorians themselves." Li Ra and her team immediately began planning with Q Huan. The Valorian commander had access to weapons technology that was 1,000 years ahead of Earth's understanding. He could not send his entire fleet to Earth without being discovered, but he could send ships in pieces. He could send weapons components disguised as debris. He could send tactical information and defensive technology. He could help Earth prepare for the battle that was coming. Journalist Su Jin was sent to cover Earth's final preparations. Su Jin was not a war correspondent. She was a writer who told human stories. She had spent her career capturing moments that revealed what people were really about. Now she would document humanity's final stand. She moved between military bases and shelters, recording images and stories. She interviewed soldiers preparing for war they could not win. She interviewed families saying goodbye to each other. She interviewed scientists working on last-minute defensive systems. She captured it all, preparing to send it to the galaxy as humanity's final statement. The days before the battle were strange and urgent. Everyone on Earth knew what was coming. There was no hope of victory, but there was still hope that they would be remembered. Su Jin's broadcasts were going out to every corner of the galaxy, telling the story of a small species preparing to die with dignity. Engineer Tae Sung worked furiously on converting Q Huan's technology into systems that Earth's military could use. It was like trying to teach someone to drive a flying vehicle when they had only ever walked. The technology was too advanced. The time was too short. But Tae Sung was brilliant, and desperation made people work faster. He managed to integrate some of the Valorian defensive systems into Earth's space stations and military installations. Researcher Nari was studying something different. She was tracking how the human message was affecting other species in the galaxy. Her data showed that the rebellion was growing, not just on one world, but on many worlds. The species that served the Valorian Empire were beginning to organize. They were beginning to work together. The human message had done something that Valorian oppression had never quite managed. It had given different species a reason to unite. The night before the battle, Earth was quiet. Soldiers were in their positions. Weapons were ready. Defensive shields were activated. Scientists and engineers stood by for any last-minute systems that might fail. Families held each other in shelters deep underground. The world was holding its breath. Jinho stood at the observatory one final time. He had come back to the place where everything had started. The same screens where he had discovered the Valorian message were now showing him the approaching fleet. The ships were visible now as small points of light growing steadily brighter. They would arrive in approximately 6 hours. He thought about how strange life was. Just months ago, he had been a scientist doing routine work, checking data from space. He had never expected to change anything. He had never expected to become part of something this significant. And yet here he was, waiting for the galaxy's most powerful empire to arrive and destroy everything. The morning sun rose on Earth, and the Valorian fleet appeared on the horizon. They were vast and terrible, hundreds of ships arranged in patterns that suggested military precision. They began broadcasting a message. "This planet is scheduled for destruction. Surrender is not an option. Resistance is futile." Captain Li Ra looked at the screens showing the approaching armada. She looked at the soldiers around her, ready to fight. She looked at the weapons that Q Huan had sent, weapons that would barely slow down the invaders. and she gave the order to attack. The battle lasted 3 days. From Earth's perspective, it was a miracle. From the Valorian perspective, it was a nightmare they could not have predicted. The first day started badly for Earth. Valorian weapons were devastatingly effective. They destroyed military installations with precision. They damaged space stations. They killed thousands of soldiers who were fighting with technology that was centuries behind the enemy's capabilities. It seemed like the battle would be over quickly, with Earth completely defeated by midday. But Q Huan's ships arrived. They came out of jump space at exactly the right moment, attacking the Valorian fleet from an unexpected angle. The defection of a Valorian commander shocked the invasion fleet. For just a moment, the discipline of the Valorian military broke. Ships hesitated. Commanders questioned orders. In a military organization built on absolute obedience, even a moment of hesitation was fatal. Q Huan's fleet was smaller than the main Valorian force, but he knew Valorian tactics better than anyone. He knew where the weaknesses were. He knew how to coordinate attacks to maximum effect. More importantly, his ships were fighting with purpose. They were fighting to prevent an extinction. They were fighting because something had changed inside them. Captain Li Ra coordinated Earth's forces with precision. She did not try to win. She knew that was impossible. Instead, she focused on survival. She protected the major cities. She defended the regions where most of humanity lived. She used Tai Sung's improvised weapons with careful calculation. Every shot had to count because she had limited ammunition. The second day brought more arrivals. Ships that Q Huan had convinced to defect began appearing throughout the battle. Not all of them Valorian. Some were from other species that served the Valorian Empire. Some were from species that had received the human message and decided that they, too, were tired of being ruled. The rebellion that had been quietly growing in the Valorian Empire suddenly erupted into open warfare. 47 different worlds declared independence simultaneously. Military forces that had been stationed there to maintain control suddenly found themselves under attack by their own subjects. The Valorian leadership, focused on destroying Earth, could not manage a simultaneous rebellion across half their empire. Researcher Nari watched the data streaming in and realized what was happening. The human message had not just inspired hope, it had inspired coordination. Different species were sharing information. They were learning from each other. They were attacking the Empire at its most vulnerable points. The Valorian military, spread thin across their vast empire, could not respond to every threat at once. Journalist Su Jin was in an observation bunker, recording everything that was happening. She watched as human ships, piloted by soldiers who had trained for weeks instead of years, fought against machines that had never been defeated. Some of them died. Many of them died. But some of them got through. Some of them actually damaged the Valorian ships. Some of them made the Empire's mighty fleet bleed. The third day changed everything. A massive Valorian command ship was destroyed. It was struck by a coordinated attack from Q Huan's forces and 3 other defected species working together. The command ship, which had been directing the invasion, exploded in spectacular fashion. For the first time since the battle began, the Valorian fleet had no clear leadership. Commanders fell back to defensive positions instead of pushing forward aggressively. That was when Jin Ho made a final decision. He had recorded one last message. A personal message to the Valorian people. He spoke calmly, without anger, without hatred. He spoke about what humans had learned through their long history. He spoke about the fact that empires built on force never lasted. He spoke about the fact that true power came from unity and purpose, not from dominance and control. He spoke about the human dream of a galaxy where different species could live together without fear. The message was distributed across every Valorian communication channel. It was heard by soldiers and civilians, by the ruling classes and the servants, by everyone. And it was heard by billions of other beings across the galaxy who received it through defected Valorian communication networks. By the end of the third day, something impossible had happened. The Valorian invasion fleet was retreating, not because they had been defeated militarily, but because their military structure was collapsing. Soldiers were refusing orders. Commanders were deciding that the Empire's way was wrong. The certainty that had held the Valorian Empire together for centuries was crumbling. Q Huan's fleet pursued the retreating Valorians, not to destroy them, but to keep them from regrouping. His ships broadcast the human message constantly, showing Valorian soldiers what they were fighting for. Slowly, more Valorian ships began defecting. Soldiers abandoned their posts. Military discipline broke down. The turning point came not with the destruction of the enemy, but with the moment when Earth realized it would survive. 3 days after the invasion fleet arrived, they began to leave. They were being hunted, not just by human ships, but by rebellious species across the galaxy. Valorian soldiers were abandoning their posts because they no longer believed in what they were fighting for. Captain Lyra watched the enemy fleet jump to faster space, escaping the battle. She sat in her command center, barely able to believe that her people were still alive. Around her, soldiers were crying and cheering. They had fought a losing battle and somehow survived. But Lyra understood what had really happened. They had not won because they were militarily stronger. They had won because they had been right. They had proven that an empire built on subjugation could not survive once its subjects discovered they had nothing left to lose. Across the galaxy, the rebellion continued. The Valorian Empire, which had stood for 300 years, began to collapse. Worlds declared independence. Species demanded autonomy. The hierarchy that had held everything in place crumbled like ancient stone. Min Kyung received a message from Q Huan. The Valorian commander had survived the battle, but he could not return to his own people. He had become a fugitive. But he wanted humanity to know that what they had done had changed everything. The message that they had sent, that simple declaration of human spirit and refusal to surrender, had inspired a galaxy to break free from oppression. The human species, the ones the Valorian Empire had thought too primitive to matter, had accidentally become the spark that burned down an empire.